The problem that this particular client approached us was the challenge with IoT and distributed data. What I mean by that was, as a retailer, you end up working with a lot of different distributors. The data received from the distributors, in many cases, is not standardized. There's no uniformity against it, which makes it quite difficult to do any kind of analytics on top of that. The second issue that this particular client was facing was IoT information was not available as feeds. They had sensors across different aisles to measure in traffic movement, to measure how many ins and outs of people they were customers they were having. But the IoT will send the data back to a server, a local server, and the client had to wait until the end of the day to upload the data to get any sort of analytics or make any decisions on top of that. With that as the approach, we're going to talk about both the problems individually. The first problem about the challenge of distributed data. As you can see on the screen, Distributor 1 ended up sending data where the locations were abbreviated or they ended up using codes for the location. For the SKU numbers as well, rather than writing in the product name, they ended up using SKU numbers, which many distributors end up doing. And for Distributor 2, they had the entire location name and they had the entire product name. Trying to combine this data and get analytics out of it, if I had to see how many chocolates am I selling, one of them is a code, one of them is a text, it becomes quite challenging for me to understand or get any analytics out of it. And the same for location-wise information. If I have to see which location has been performing better, it becomes again challenging. So having worked with the client and understanding the different distributors and the different formats that they get the data in, this client was working with around 45 different distributors. We ended up creating a single mapping sheet for all these distributors. We created a mapping sheet for location. We ended up creating a mapping sheet for SKU numbers to product name. With the mapping sheet, we were able to get all the data cleansed up and eventually come up with something that looks cleaner and also allows the retailer to identify which distributor the data is coming from. With that investment, with that particular project, before Collect Data, they were doing daily Excel sheets, collating the data manually, uploading the data onto a drive manually. They were also creating the reports manually, and every time they ended up using Excel VLOOKUP to do some sort of mapping. But after Collect Data, this uploads that were coming from distributors, they started going straight to Google Drive. We figured out a way on how we can combine them and get the data pushed to Google Drive. We also provided a mapping sheet, which could help with the fusion of the entire data set. And at the end of it, we ended up creating a report that was available at any point of time. Just to give you some sort of context on the numbers that they ended up putting on this, initially they were spending an hour to two every day trying to get this reports collected. With Click Data, they signed on for a 40-hour project where we did a fixed cost project for them, where we ended up doing everything from start to end at a certain cost. And what that led to is a total saving of 18,000 just in the first year. If they would have continued doing that for the next few years, or if the number of distributors that they were working with would have expanded, definitely the return on investment with Click Data would have been greater. The second use case about IoT. It's a challenge that we've seen in a lot of other retail sectors as well. Most of the IoTs prefer to send data to USBs, or they just prefer to send data to a local server in a CSV file, which makes it challenging for the client to get real-time analytics on top of this. So this was a data management project for us, where we had to identify the operational flow issues. Based on the issues that they were having, we decided that setting up an FTP server would be an ideal way for them to work around this particular issue. And have the data from IoT sent straight to that FTP server, which could now feed back to Click Data. And thus, the client can have some sort of real-time analytics on top of this. A similar analysis for the first problem, this client was spending an hour a year every day. A 20-hour project with Click Data helped them to streamline and automate the whole process. So they ended up saving 10,000 again in the first year itself. Just goes to say, if you're doing any sort of redundant work, if you see within your organization, you're spending an hour or 2 hours every day on the same task, there has to be an automation done on top of this. And this can be done either through an initial upfront investment so that we can identify what are the ways to automate the whole process. But in the long run, which seems like an hour every day, definitely turns back into a lot more saving that you can use for your organization. Just an example of a dashboard that we ended up creating for this particular client, and where they could see, based on the retail data that they were getting, which were the top locations, how were the sales from last year to current year. They also had item brand performance. We ended up creating 4 to 5 dashboards for this particular client.